Some challenges are thrown to test your limits, others to uncover who you truly are. When a stunning MMA champion CEO publicly called out a quiet janitor for a $10 million charity fight, the world expected a spectacle. But no one imagined the final move would rewrite everything they thought they knew about winning. Now, let's step into the story. The atrium of Hayworth Dynamics gleamed under the mid-morning light, a cathedral of glass and steel where deals were made and reputations sharpened. Employees milled around the open space, their chatter bouncing off the polished marble floors. It was supposed to be just another quarterly briefing, the kind where executives spoke about market shares and innovation pipelines. But Harper Lane had other plans. She stood at the center of a temporary mat laid out for the company's wellness and team spirit event. Her presence was magnetic, tall, poised, athletic, her tailored business jacket replaced by a black MMA rash guard, the Hayworth Dynamics logo emblazoned on the sleeve. Her hair, usually pinned in a sleek boardroom style, was tied back in a practical fighter's braid. Those who knew her reputation, two-time MMA lightweight champion, undefeated in the corporate arena, watched her with a mixture of admiration and fear. Her gaze swept the crowd. Then she stopped. At the far edge of the mat, near the janitorial cot, stood Colton Hayes. He was wearing the standard maintenance uniform, navy work pants, a grey polo shirt, and boots that had seen more years than most of the interns gathered here. He was mopping up a faint ring of sweat left by the last sparring demo. And then Harper's voice cut through the buzz like a blade. "Hey you," she said, pointing directly at him. Her tone carried across the room, commanding silence. "Want to spar, or are you afraid?" The words hit the atrium like a slap. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads swiveled. Phones came up. Colton looked up slowly. His expression didn't change. No smirk, no frown, just a calm acknowledgement that he'd been addressed. The mop handle rested lightly in his calloused hand. "You talking to me?" His voice was even, not loud, but it carried. A ripple of laughter moved through the onlookers. "This is going to be good," someone whispered. Another murmured, "She's gonna destroy him." "I am," Harper replied, stepping aside and motioning toward the mat. "Come on, just for fun, but..." The word hung in the air, edged with challenge. Colton's eyes flicked over the crowd, then back to Harper. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned the mop against the wall, wiped his hands on a folded towel from the cot, and walked toward the center of the mat. The employees closed in, forming a ring of anticipation. Phones recorded from every angle. Harper bounced lightly on the balls of her feet, rolling her shoulders, the predator's grin tugging at the corner of her lips. "Ever done this before?" she asked. Colton stopped a few feet away from her. "A while ago," he said simply. "No referee, no announcer, just two people on the mat and an audience ready for spectacle." Harper stepped forward, offering her hand. "Touch gloves." Colton took it, not with the limp uncertainty of a novice, but with a measured firmness, as if noting her balance through that brief contact. His grip released without a word. The room seemed to shrink. Harper moved first, a testing jab of her lead hand toward his shoulder. Colton didn't flinch. He shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, letting her strike glance past as though the air between them had thickened. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. She circled, light on her feet, then tried a low kick, aiming to disrupt his stance. Again, he adjusted just enough to neutralize it. No dramatic block, no counterattack, just a quiet refusal to be moved. The crowd chuckled nervously. "Come on, Harper," someone called. She feinted a clinch, sliding her arm in for control. That's when Colton moved, not aggressively, but with a precision that made the motion look almost casual. His hips turned, guiding her momentum past him. His hand touched her elbow, barely more than a tap, and the next instant, her balance was gone. It happened in a blink. One moment, Harper was pressing forward, sure-footed. The next, the floor was rising toward her. She hit the mat on her side, the sound of her body meeting the canvas sharp in the hushed room. No one laughed this time. Harper stayed down for a heartbeat longer than necessary, her eyes locked on the ceiling. She wasn't hurt, not physically, but the impact rattled more than her ribs. Colton stepped back, giving her space. He didn't gloat. He didn't offer a hand. He simply stood, posture relaxed, breathing steady, as if the entire thing had been nothing more than adjusting a picture frame on a wall. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, a single voice whispered, "What just happened?" Harper pushed herself up, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. She rose to her feet without taking her eyes off him. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked, her voice quieter now, less a challenge, more an inquiry. Colton met her gaze, his tone still calm. "A long time ago." The answer was maddeningly vague. She studied him for another second, then gave a tight smile. "Well," she said, turning back toward the watching employees. "Consider that our warm-up, but the energy in the room had shifted. The crowd wasn't looking at her anymore. They were looking at him, at the man who'd just walked onto the mat with nothing but work boots and quiet confidence, and walked away, leaving the undefeated Harper Lane on the ground." Colton picked up his mop, returned to the edge of the mat, and resumed where he had left off, as if nothing had happened. Harper stood in the center, her heartbeat loud in her ears. She told herself it was just a slip, just bad footing. But deep down, a question took root, stubborn and unmihal. Who exactly was Colton Hayes? The applause that never came haunted Harper Lane more than the fall itself. In the elevator up to the executive floor, she watched her reflection in the brushed steel, composed jawline, fighter's braid, no tremor in the hands. A CEO again. A champion. The doors opened to the glass and oak sanctum of the 20th floor, and the performance resumed. "Send me everything on Colton Hayes," she told her assistant without breaking stride. "Employment file, references, anything public. Yesterday would be great." "Yes, Ms. Lane." She shut the office door softly. Alone, the quiet had weight. Harper leaned both palms on the desk and reclined into a breath the way she had been taught. 4 counts in, 4 out, before opening her laptop. Emails multiplied in the corner like dragonflies. Wellness event highlights. Great morale boost. Interesting moment on the mat. Corporate euphemisms for what everyone had just seen. Her phone buzzed. A text from the COO, Howard Drake. "Great show. Maybe next time pick someone with fewer surprises." A winking emoji followed, smug even in monochrome. She ignored it and clicked into the security feed archive, scrubbing to the moment when the room settled and the cameras caught the shift. The way he had touched her elbow, like a breeze redirecting a sail. The way the floor rose to meet her. She watched the fall 3 times. Slow motion. Then frame by frame. There was no malice in his movement, no triumph after. Just precision and restraint. The knock came 10 minutes later. "Come," she said. Her assistant entered with a thin manila folder and the apologetic expression of someone bringing a glass of water during a wildfire. "I'm sorry, Ms. Lane. There's very little." Harper opened the folder. Maintenance onboarding. Background check. Clean. Emergency contact. Evan Hayes. Son. No social media. No listed certifications. No HR flags. 6 months tenure. That was it. Everyone leaves a trail, Harper murmured. Not him, the assistant said, then hesitated. There's one more thing. The footage is already circulating, but not the official angle. Harper's eyes lifted. Circulating where? In Slack threads, private group chats. Someone clipped a 9-second version. He set a tablet on her desk and pressed play. The video opened mid-motion, Harper advancing, Colton nearly still. Then the quick turn, the soft collapse, the collective inhale. No sound, no context. A watermark from a random employee's phone in the corner. The caption read, "When the janitor teaches the champ humility." Harper felt heat crowd her neck. Who posted it? We're tracking that. It's jumping. Memes already. He swallowed. Some are defending you. Others say you staged it. A handful say you lost a step. Harper forced a smile that never reached her eyes. Lock down the official footage. If we release anything, it will be the full context. When the assistant left, Harper stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city that had rewarded her control with quarterly increases and glowing profiles. Below, the atrium receded into a glossy postcard. From here, nothing shook. Her phone buzzed again. Howard, PR thinks we should get ahead of this. Maybe frame it as a teaching moment. Ego versus discipline. You love that line. Another text before she could reply. Also, facilities says Hayes is assigned to the West Wing this week. One and moved. Optics and all. Harper typed, then deleted. She was not going to banish a man because a clip went viral within a building. She would not be that kind of leader. Not today. Downstairs, the building hummed. The coffee bar became a courtroom. The corridors, a jury box. In the open-plan engineering bay, a half-dozen developers debated over cold brew and whispers. She threw it, one insisted. You could see her feet. She let him redirect. Are you kidding? She got swept. Another countered. He barely touched her, and she went over like it was physics, not force. A product manager scrolled through the 9-second clip and shook her head. These angles lie. Where's the beginning? Where's the handshake? She probably set him up to make a point. Point made, a voice said from the aisle. We just don't know whose. In HR, someone suggested a training series. Bias on the mat. Seeing the invisible. In finance, the CFO quipped in a private thread. If he can sweep our CEO, maybe he can sweep our vendor contracts. Laughter emoji storms followed. And yet, in quieter corners, the tide ran the other way. A mailroom clerk replayed the clip and felt a tug of recognition. The way his father used to move in the garage, careful and strong, after the service had taken, and given and taken again. A receptionist watched the stillness in Colton's posture and thought of her brother's serenity after rehab, the way gentleness could hold more voltage than aggression. By late afternoon, the clip had morphed into versions. The slow-mo with triumphant brass, the freeze frame with giant arrows, and the text, "Gotcha." The inspirational cut with piano, and a quote misattributed to Marcus Aurelius. The greatest victory is to conquer the self. People chose the truth that made them feel safest. Harper walked the floor. She made the rounds when storms threatened, not because she liked to be seen, but because the ground always told her the weather before the clouds did. People straightened when she approached. Conversations changed key. She smiled and asked after projects. She nodded at screens. But in the elevator down to facilities, she let the performance fall away. The doors opened to a corridor that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and wet concrete. Honest smells in a world that preferred bergamot and spin. She found him in a service hallway, rolling a bin of microfiber cloths. "Mr. Hayes," she said. He glanced up. "Ms. Lane." They considered each other in the neutral territory of fluorescent light. "I owe you an apology," she began, surprising herself with the ease of it. "I treated you like a prop in a lesson I hadn't fully learned." He studied her face for mockery and found none. "You didn't have to say that." "Maybe I did." She folded her arms, not defensively. She needed somewhere to put her hands. "There's a 9-second clip going around. It makes me look human," he offered. She almost smiled. "Fallible. Did you post it?" "No." "Do you mind that it's out there?" Colton weighed the question. "People see what they want. 9 seconds won't change that." "And you?" she asked. "What did you see?" "A slip," he said. "Good fighters slip. Great leaders admit it." The compliment landed, and didn't. "Where did you learn to move like that?" He paused a fraction too long. "I used to train." She wanted to press. Where? With whom? How far? But the part of her that had kept her alive in cages and boardrooms said, "Later. Earn it." "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'd like the official footage kept internal. No edits. No narration. If anything leaves this building, it should be the truth, not a myth." "Truth is heavier to carry," he said. "I can lift," she replied. A silence that wasn't hostile, just full. She nodded and stepped back. "Thank you for your time." As she turned to go, he said, almost as an afterthought, "Ms. Lane." She faced him. "You were fast," he said. "Your balance is excellent. You overcommitted because you lead from the front. It's a strength. In a fight, it's also a tell." The feedback cut clean. She tucked it away like a knife she meant to sharpen. Upstairs, PR drafted talking points. Harper Lane demonstrates vulnerability and vision. Turns a spar into a lesson in culture. Howard Drake suggested a town hall. "Own the narrative," he said, tapping his Rolex against the conference table. "Lean into the humility angle." "Or," Harper replied, "we could stop calling it an angle." He blinked as if she'd spoken another language. By evening, the building exhaled. Most lights dimmed. A few glowed stubborn in engineering. The city outside bloomed into constellations. Harper sat alone and watched the sun slide off the harbor, the water turning from silver to slate. On her screen, the 9-second clip looped silently. The modern equivalent of a rumor passed from porch to porch. She clicked it closed and opened a blank document. The title line blinked. "Wellness Series. Strength without spectacle." She began to type, and as she did, her inbox pinged. An anonymous message routed through the internal suggestion portal. "He didn't win, Ms. Lane. He reminded us what winning can look like. No signature, no attachments. Just that." Harper closed the laptop and stood, feeling the floor beneath her feet, with a fighter's curiosity. The ripples had started. She wouldn't drown in them. She would learn their rhythm. Down in facilities, Colton finished his shift and shouldered his duffel. He paused at the glass, watching the lobby empty to a quiet his bones recognized. He thought of the look in Harper's eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something like hunger for a different kind of control. He respected that. He also knew ripples become currents, and currents pull you toward deeper water. He checked his phone. A text from Evan. "Dad, can we make pancakes for dinner? Also, I saw a video of you at work. You look like a ninja. Love you." Colton smiled, the day's weight reorganizing into something lighter. "Pancakes it is. Love you more." Outside, the night settled. Inside, the story began to travel without anyone pushing it, and somewhere between the 20th floor and the service corridor, two people who traded in victory were about to relearn what it meant to win. Colton Hayes moved through the quiet hum of his apartment kitchen with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent years in places where timing meant survival. A cast-iron skillet hissed softly on the stove, the smell of butter and garlic already curling into the air. Evan sat at the small wooden table, elbows planted, chin resting on his hands as he worked his way through a math worksheet. 10 more minutes, Colton said, turning the chicken breast in the pan with a flick of the wrist. Then we eat. Evan's pencil scratched against paper. Can we still watch The Incredibles tonight? If homework's done. Colton tasted the sauce, adjusted the salt. The ritual of it, the warmth, the sizzle, the small talk, was a kind of therapy. Here, in this space, the world narrowed to one room, one boy, one life. And that was how he liked it. But the tattoos on his forearms, half hidden beneath rolled sleeves, told other stories. So did the faint scar at his jawline, and the way he kept the apartment's front door double-locked, even during daylight. After dinner, Evan launched himself onto the couch, remote in hand. Colton joined him, a beer in one hand, his other arm draped casually along the back cushion. The movie started, bright colors splashing across the room. Evan laughed freely, the way kids do when they haven't yet learned to ration joy. Colton smiled, but his mind wandered. To sand and dust, to the thump of rotor blades, to cages, both the ones made of chain link and MMA gyms, and the ones you could never see, but always feel. He had been 25 when he walked away from it all. The deployments, the fight contracts, the chase for a title belt that could have been his. One wrong choice, one moment of hesitation in a sparring session, had rewritten everything. And some nights, the silence in this apartment carried the echoes of that moment back to him. Across the city, in a penthouse lit by warm amber lamps, Harper Lane sat with a half-finished glass of Merlot, her phone screen glowing against her palm. She was not scrolling for distraction. She was reading the same message over and over. Harper, the text began. I saw your little match at the office. Didn't know you had Colton Hayes mopping your floors. It was from Jenna Ruiz, an old teammate from her earliest MMA days. Harper's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. You know who he is, right? The next bubble read. That's the same Colton from the Blake incident. 12 years ago. Camp Redwood. Hunter never fought again after that. The Blake incident. Harper's stomach nodded. Hunter Blake. Her first serious love. The boy who had trained beside her, bled beside her, dreamed with her. The boy whose career had ended on a mat with doctors kneeling over him, neck braced, eyes wide with pain. Back then, the details had been a fog of rumors. Some blamed a bad fall, some whispered about a dirty hit in training. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, the gym split into factions, each convinced of its own truth. Harper had chosen to believe Hunter's version, that the other fighter, a newcomer named Colton Hayes, had been reckless, maybe even aggressive. She hadn't thought about Colton in years, not until he'd stood on that corporate mat and swept her off her feet like he'd been born to it. Her phone buzzed again. I'm not saying go to war, Jenna's text read. But if I were you, I'd want answers. Harper stood, pacing to the floor-to-ceiling window. The skyline glittered below, indifferent. She replayed the spar in her mind, slowing the moment of the sweep. There had been no cruelty in it, no gloating, but there had been precision, and that precision was dangerous. She drained the wine, set the glass down with more force than necessary, and grabbed her jacket. The streets between her penthouse and Colton's neighborhood were two different worlds. Harper's driver threaded the black sedan past gleaming storefronts, then into blocks where the neon dimmed and the sidewalks cracked. She asked him to stop a block early, preferring to walk the last stretch. Colton's building was a low rise of faded brick, its front stoop lit by a single bulb that hummed faintly. She didn't see him outside, but a glance through the windows told her enough. Warm lamplight, the shape of a boy laughing on a couch, the silhouette of a man moving toward the kitchen. She didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, she leaned against the brick wall opposite, watching. The Colton Hayes she remembered from whispered stories was a shadowy figure and a cautionary tale. The one she'd just sparred with was calm, measured. Which one was real? A part of her, a part she didn't like, hoped for confrontation. That would be simpler. Anger was easier than doubt. From inside, she heard faint strains of movie dialogue and the low rumble of Colton's voice. The domesticity of it unsettled her more than any fight could. She whispered into the night, her breath clouding in the cool air. "You won't hide behind a mop forever, Colton Hayes." The words weren't for him. Not yet. They were for herself. A promise. A warning. And somewhere inside that apartment, Colton glanced toward the window as if he'd felt something, an old instinct pricking the air, telling him the past had just found his address. The news broke on a bright Thursday morning, splashed across sports blogs, MMA forums, and the financial pages alike. A charity MMA event with a staggering $10 million purse for veterans' causes. It was the kind of figure that made both fight fans and philanthropists sit up straight. The venue would be Madison Square Garden. The date, 2 months away. The lineup, still forming. By the time Harper Lane walked into the press conference at the Midtown Athletic Center, every camera lens in the room was already trained on her. She wore a navy power suit cut to perfection, hair pulled back in a sharp ponytail that made her look less like a CEO and more like a commander about to deploy. Reporters leaned forward as she approached the podium, the flash of bulbs peppering her with light. Harper didn't bother with pleasantries. "This event," she began, her voice firm, "is about more than just combat sports. It's about honoring those who served, men and women, who put their lives on the line, often without recognition. And I intend to fight in it." That in itself was headline-worthy. An active corporate CEO stepping into the cage for charity. But she wasn't done. She let the pause hang just long enough for tension to coil in the air. "And I already know who I want in the opposite corner." She smiled faintly, though there was steel in it. "Colton Hayes." A ripple moved through the room, reporters shifting in seats, camera operators zooming in. Someone in the back muttered, "Isn't he the janitor from her company?" "I've seen what he can do," Harper continued, deliberately keeping her tone even. "And I think the public deserves to see it too. It's for a good cause. He'll have my respect, win or lose, if he steps into the cage with me." The questions erupted instantly. "Is this personal? What's the history between you two? Does he even fight professionally?" But Harper simply raised her hand and left the podium, letting the speculation feed itself. By the time the clip hit the internet, Colton was already at work, pushing a cleaning cart down an empty hallway. The echo of his boots on the tile was steady, unhurried, until his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a text from Joe, an old army buddy. "Man, you're trending." Colton frowned, clicking the link. There it was, Harper at the podium, her voice clear, her gaze direct. The words Colton Hayes practically leapt out of the captions. The video had been up for less than 2 hours and already had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments ranged from amused disbelief, "She's calling out the janitor," to fervent curiosity, "I saw that office spar. Guy's legit." Colton didn't bother replying to Joe. He just locked the phone and went back to work, his expression unreadable. By the end of the day, 2 reporters had tried to ambush him in the lobby, one from Sports Illustrated, another from a local news affiliate. He walked past them without slowing, ignoring the shouted questions. When Harper's assistant finally tracked him down in the staff break room, she was out of breath. "She says it's for a good cause. She says she'll make sure you're taken care of." "What do I tell her?" Colton didn't look up from the sandwich he was making. Tell her no. That night, in their modest apartment, Evan was sprawled on the living room rug, building a precarious tower of Lego bricks. Colton sat on the couch, reading a paperback, the spine bent from years of travel. "Dad," Evan said suddenly, not looking up from his construction, "were you on TV today?" Colton raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Ben's brother showed us a video at school. Some lady said she wanted to fight you." Colton exhaled slowly. "It's not a fight, and I'm not doing it." Evan paused, the Lego brick in his hand hovering mid-air. "Why not?" "Because it's not important." Evan finally looked up, his eyes serious in a way that made him seem older than 9. "You always tell me you have to protect what's important. Isn't this about protecting you?" The question hung in the air. Colton's chest tightened, not because the boy was wrong, but because he'd hit too close to the truth. Protecting himself meant protecting the quiet life they'd built, the safety of anonymity, the distance from the past. But hearing it in Evan's voice made it sound like something else entirely. Cowardice. Colton managed a small smile and reached over to ruffle his son's hair. "Building that tower's more important right now." Evan grinned and went back to stacking bricks, but the words had already settled somewhere deep inside Colton, like the first day a ripple from a stone dropped into still water. Across town, Harper sat in her office with the city lights glittering behind her. The press coverage was even bigger than she'd expected. Sports analysts debating Colton's potential, veterans groups applauding the charity angle, gossip blogs salivating over the CEO versus janitor narrative. She didn't care about the noise. What she cared about was the flash in Colton's eyes during their spar, the unspoken history that made his refusal sting. This wasn't just about the $10 million. This was about answers. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You can say no all you want, Hayes," she murmured to the empty room, "but you and I both know this isn't over." And somewhere in a small apartment across the city, Colton stared at the ceiling long after Evan had fallen asleep, that same thought gnawing at him. This wasn't over. By Monday morning, the boardroom of Lane Global felt less like a place of business and more like a crucible. The tension was invisible, but suffocating. Polished mahogany table, gleaming skyline beyond the windows, and the heavy perfume of power struggles lingering in the air. Harper sat at the head of the table, back straight, eyes cool. She could feel the undercurrent before Howard Drake even opened his mouth. The COO's smile was the same as always, thin, pleasant, and sharp enough to cut glass. "I think we have a perception problem," Howard began, his tone light but laced with intent. "You publicly challenge your janitor to a fight. He refuses, and now the press is having a field day. Memes, hashtags, you name it. I'm sure you've seen the latest hashtag mop and run is trending." A few board members chuckled under their breath. Harper didn't. Howard swiped a tablet, projecting a slideshow onto the wall. Images of Colton, one in his maintenance uniform, one mid-spar in the grainy office footage, flickered past. They were paired with sarcastic captions. Fight or flight. This janitor chose flight. Mop in hand. Hard in the broom closet. Howard's voice was syrupy as he continued. Now, I'm sure you meant well. Charity, veterans, all noble causes. But if the public sees you as the CEO who picked on the help, or worse, the CEO who couldn't get the help to accept a challenge, well, shareholders might have questions. The message was clear. Her authority was in play. Harper locked eyes with him, her jaw tightening. "Noted, Howard," she said evenly. But inside, she felt the weight of the trap tightening around her. Across the city, Colton was fixing a leaky faucet in an empty office suite when his phone buzzed. This time, he didn't need to open the link to know what it was. He'd seen the images on social media already, his face plastered onto action movie posters, onto cartoons of janitors sweeping up a knocked-out MMA fighter. He ignored it, but the internet had a way of seeping into the real world. At 3:15 that afternoon, Evan came trudging out of school slower than usual. Colton spotted him from the car and waved. Evan didn't wave back. When he slid into the passenger seat, he kept his eyes on his backpack zipper. "Everything okay?" Colton asked. Evan shrugged. "Just some kids being stupid." Colton waited. "They were showing that video again, the one of the lady asking you to fight. They said you didn't do it 'cause you're scared. Said my dad's just a janitor who cleans up other people's messes." Colton's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the tendons in his forearms standing out like cords. "What did you say?" "I told them you weren't scared, that you've done stuff they couldn't even imagine. But they laughed." Evan's voice wavered, and he quickly looked out the window. "It's just, they don't know you." Colton exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. "You know me," he said finally. "That's what matters." But as they drove home, the words didn't sit right. Evan had defended him with conviction, and yet the boy's small shoulders were hunched as if bracing against a storm. Colton felt something shift inside. A pressure point pressed not by Harper, not by the media, but by the quiet disappointment in his own son's eyes. Meanwhile, Harper's PR team was running overtime, trying to contain the narrative. Every time they stamped out one meme, 3 more appeared. One particularly popular image had Harper in full fight gear, facing off against a cartoon janitor holding a mop like a spear. The caption, "Battle for the break room." Harper's assistant, Naomi, dropped into the chair opposite her desk. "This is spiraling," she said bluntly. "If we don't get him to say yes soon, it'll look like you're chasing someone who wants nothing to do with you." "That's because he wants nothing to do with me," Harper replied dryly. But even as she said it, she felt a twinge of something more complicated. Frustration, yes, but also curiosity. Why wouldn't he step up? Pride? Fear? Or was it something deeper? Howard, of course, was fanning the flames. She'd overheard him in the hallway, his voice just loud enough to carry. She's losing control of the narrative. Maybe she's not the fighter she thinks she is. It wasn't just about the charity match anymore. It was about her credibility, in the boardroom, in the cage, in the eyes of the people who worked for her. That night, Colton sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. Evan was asleep in the next room. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. He pulled out his phone, scrolling past headlines. CEO Lane calls out janitor, gets ghosted. Mystery maintenance man ducks $10 million charity fight. From mop to MMA. Not likely. Colton set the phone face down. He told himself he didn't care, that the noise outside didn't touch the life he'd built. But Evan's voice from earlier wouldn't leave him. "They don't know you." Maybe they didn't. Maybe Harper didn't either. But if he stepped into that cage, if he accepted, they would. And that, Colton realized with a grim twist of irony, might be exactly what he was afraid of. The MMA gym was quiet when Colton stepped inside. Too quiet for a place meant for combat. The scent of leather, disinfectant, and sweat lingered in the air. The low hum of the ventilation system filled the space between the rhythmic thuds of gloves against heavy bags. Harper was there in the center of the mat, hair tied back tight, black training gear hugging her frame like a second skin. She moved with precision, fast, efficient combinations that cracked against her sparring partner's pads. Her voice was clipped, cold, and unyielding as she barked corrections. No, pivot on the cross, don't just throw it. Again, faster. The young fighter obeyed, but Harper stopped him mid-combination, physically adjusting his stance with a firm grip. There was no malice in her tone, but no warmth either. Only a relentless demand for perfection. Colton stayed near the doorway, arms crossed. He'd come to give her his final answer. No cameras, no press. Just a clean break from this ridiculous circus. But as he watched, something shifted inside him. Her command, her sharp focus, the tension in the air. It all blurred into a memory. The desert heat pressed down like a living thing. Sand stung his eyes. He was back in that makeshift training ground, barking orders at younger soldiers who were too green to understand how fast the world could turn on them. Again, you don't stop until it's muscle memory. The air had smelled of dust and gun oil then, but the weight in his chest now was the same, and with it came the memory of failure. The one mission that had gone sideways, the one that had cost a man his career and almost his life. He blinked, and Harper's voice snapped him back. She finally noticed him and waved off her partner. "Decided to face me without an audience this time," she said, tossing her gloves aside. "I came to tell you no, for good," Colton replied. His voice was even, but inside, Evan's words gnawed at him. "They don't know you." Harper smirked, grabbing a towel from the bench. "That's what you came all the way here for. To say no again? You could have texted. I figured I owed you a face-to-face." She stepped closer, her expression sharpening. "You're afraid." Colton's jaw tightened, but he didn't take the bait. "You want to think that? Go ahead. I'm not stepping into a cage to play your PR game." Harper tilted her head. "It's not just PR. It's $10 million for a cause that matters. Or does that not matter to you?" Colton's eyes flickered. He knew exactly what $10 million could do for veteran families. Housing, therapy, scholarships. He'd seen too many brothers in arms come home to nothing, and then he thought of Evan, standing small in the shadow of his classmates' laughter. The decision hit him before he realized he was making it. "All right," he said finally, his voice like gravel. "I'll do it." Harper's eyebrows lifted. "You'll... what?" "I'll fight you, but on one condition. If I win, every cent of that prize goes to the Veteran Families Relief Fund. No split, no overhead, no fancy gala, straight to the people who need it." She studied him, arms folded, as if measuring whether he was serious. "And if I win? You can keep your PR victory, and the money goes wherever you planned." A slow smile curved her lips, not smug, but something more dangerous. "Deal." She extended her hand. Colton didn't take it right away. He stepped closer, closing the space between them until her reflection filled his pupils. "But know this, Harper. This isn't for you, and it's not for the cameras. This is for something bigger. So don't expect me to pull my punches." Her smile didn't fade. "Good. I'd be insulted if you did." Their handshake was firm, almost a clash in itself. The moment their palms met, Harper felt it. The quiet force behind his grip. The kind that didn't need to be loud to be lethal. Colton, for his part, felt the steel in hers. It wasn't just a match anymore. It was a reckoning. That night, Colton returned home to find Evan sitting at the kitchen table with his math homework spread out. The boy looked up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Did you tell her no?" Evan asked. Colton hesitated, then let a slow smile tug at his lips. "Not exactly." Evan blinked. "Wait, you mean... I mean, you better start thinking about what you're gonna wear to the biggest fight night this town's ever seen." Evan grinned, wide and unguarded. For the first time in weeks, Colton saw the boy's shoulders lift, his chest expand with pride. And in that moment, Colton knew, win or lose, stepping into that cage was already worth it. Morning broke in two different worlds that pretended to be the same city. On the east side, the sun slid over glass towers and caught on the mirrored walls of Apex Combat Lab, the private facility where champions paid to become legends. Inside, the air smelled clean, eucalyptus and disinfectant, and the floors gleamed like a promise you could keep if you worked hard enough. Hopper Lane stepped onto the mat at 600 a.m., sharp, her coach already waiting. Raul Ortega was a quiet man, with hands like stone and eyes that missed nothing. "No cameras," he said, rolling his shoulders. "Just work." "Just work," Hopper echoed. They moved in silence at first. Footwork ladders, shadow boxing with a metronome dictating cadence. Raul slapped mitts, calling numbers without looking at her. 1-2, slip, pivot, again. His voice was the drumbeat of discipline. Her body followed. She was fast. She had always been fast, but speed without control was vanity, and vanity was what had put her on the mat in front of Colton Hayes in the first place. So she dug deeper into the mechanics, hip alignment, weight transfer, the quiet art of not overcommitting. When she overreached, Raul tapped her forehead with a mitt like a priest with holy water. "Greed," he said. "You reach because you want to end exchanges on your terms. He'll make you pay." Hopper swallowed a retort. "Then teach me patience." Raul snorted. "Patience isn't taught. It's trained." He feinted a level change. Hopper sprawled late. He tapped her knees with the pads. Again. Across town, an old rec center smelled like yesterday. Dust, rubber, and the faint nostalgia of 1,000 basketball games. The lights flickered awake one tube at a time. Colton Hayes unlocked the side door and propped it with a brick. He had the place for an hour before the pickleball crowd claimed it like a sunrise ritual. He hung a battered heavy bag from a chain that squealed, then wrapped his hands while Evan laced a jump rope around small wrists. "Keep your elbows in," Colton said. Evan started to skip, tripping on the third swing. He grinned, started again. Colton worked the bag at an unhurried tempo, jab, jab, breathe, reset, right hand that stopped inches short of full power. He didn't need to feel the punch land to know it could. Between combinations, he guided Evan through basics. Stance like roots, chin tucked like a secret, eyes level as a horizon. "Fists aren't for anger," Colton said. "They're for answers when nothing else will do." "Like when someone is mean?" Evan asked, bouncing in place. "Sometimes the bravest thing is to walk away," Colton replied. "But if you can't, then you move well. You keep your balance, and you protect yourself first." The montage wrote itself, two lives sharpening in parallel. Hopper drilled under harsh fluorescent light that made every flaw honest. Colton moved in the half-shadow of a gym that had seen better years, but still believed in the work. Raul hammered Hopper's instincts into discipline. Colton sanded his discipline until it felt like instinct again. "Frame the clinch," Raoul said, threading Harper's forearm between his and pinning her against the cage wall. He's stronger than you think. Use geometry. Hips back. Head on jaw. Pressure. Not violence. In the rec center, Colton showed Evan how to post with a palm on a partner's shoulder and step around a bully without escalating. He did it slow, like teaching a dance. The boy giggled when his dad turned his own momentum into a harmless orbit. "It's like you're a planet," Evan said, "and I'm the moon." "Planets don't throw punches," Colton replied, smiling despite himself. Back at Apex, Harper worked chain wrestling, single leg to high crotch to trip. She missed a finish. Raoul stuffed her and cranked a crossface that made stars prick at the edges of her vision. "You'll get hit," he said, letting go. "You'll want to fight back with pride. Pride leaks gas from your tank. Thin your ego. Thickness in your defense, not your story." "Thin my ego," Harper repeated, more to herself than to him. She thought of 9 seconds that had eaten a day of her life. She thought of a janitor who had moved like water and left her holding the shape of her own aggression. She thought of a 12-year-old memory with Hunter Blake, all swagger and grit, telling her the mat never lied. "Again," she said, and Raoul nodded. At the rec center, Colton paused, hands on hips, breath steady. He watched Evan climb the pull-up bar like it was a jungle gym. There was joy in the boy's movement that no coach could manufacture. It was the kind that survived playgrounds and pandemics and the slow weathering of a home where money was a guest, not a resident. "Dad?" Evan said between pulls. "Yeah, if you win," Evan asked, dropping back to the ground and wiping his forehead with the hem of his t-shirt. "Could we buy Grandpa's old dojo back?" Colton blinked. The question drifted to him like a paper boat floating down a current he hadn't realized was still moving. His father's dojo, a storefront with faded signage, and a bell that rang like a laugh when the door opened. He remembered the smell of canvas and tiger balm, the old man who stayed late to argue about honor like it was a living thing. The dojo had closed when bills became bigger than memories. "Where'd you hear about that?" Colton asked softly. "Grandma told me once," Evan said. "She said you learned your first punch there. She said you learned to say sorry there, too." Colton chuckled, something tight unwinding in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "Both of those are true." Evan's eyes were bright with conspiracy. "We could fix it up. You could teach kids, not just fighting, like the balance stuff. We could put a sign that says, 'No bullies, no brags.'" Colton looked away, so the boy wouldn't see his eyes shine. In his mind, he saw the dojo's cracked mirror replaced, the scuffed mats reborn, the afternoon light slanting through blinds as laughter and effort shared the same air. "If we win," he said finally, voice roughened, "we'll see what we can do." He didn't add what he felt, that some things were too sacred to be bought back, that some were waiting to be invited home. Evan nodded like a promise had been made. "Okay, I'll help sweep." "You and me both," Colton said, and the words felt like an oath. Back at Apex, Harper finished a brutal round on the assault bike, lungs burning, legs screaming. Raoul stood with a stopwatch, bored as a metronome. At the beep, he tossed her a medicine ball. "Wall throws. Power comes from the floor. Your hands just deliver the message." She slammed the ball against the wall, catching it on the rebound. With each throw, she imagined anger exploding and returning as something she could hold without flinching. She imagined headlines turning to hush, hush turning to a respect that didn't need her approval. She imagined Colton's voice, calm, infuriatingly calm, saying, "I used to train like it was a footnote and not a biography." Again, Raoul said, and she threw until the ball felt like a planet, and she felt like gravity refusing to let go. As dusk folded over the city, both gyms exhaled. Harper cooled down with a long stretch, fingers trailing the mat as if it were a shoreline. Raoul sat beside her, unexpectedly gentle. "You're fighting a mirror," he said. "Win the person, not the narrative." She didn't ask what that meant. She knew. Colton locked up the rec center and stepped into evening air that smelled like rain even when the forecast said none. Evan slipped his hand into his. They walked past closed storefronts and a ballooned grocery bag caught in a tree like a ghost who had lost its job. "Hey, Dad," Evan said. "Yeah, Moon?" "If you don't win," Evan asked carefully, "can we still fix the dojo someday?" Colton squeezed his hand. "Winning is more than a scoreboard," he said. "But yes, we'll keep it in our plans." He lifted his gaze to the blue hour, where day gave up without arguing, and felt the road under his feet like a familiar song, returning to the chorus. Harper, showered and wrapped in a sweatshirt that said, "Fight kind," stood by a window that overlooked the city's geometry. She cradled a cup of tea and let the steam fog a small corner of glass. For a moment, the reflection looking back at her wasn't a CEO or a champion. It was a girl and a too-big guy standing in a room that smelled like tape and hope, listening to a coach say, "Breathe before you move." She did. And somewhere across town, Colton did too. 2 training grounds, 1 collision course. And in the small space between inhale and exhale, both of them learned a fraction more about the fight that mattered most. The city's Friday hum was at full volume. Traffic clotted in the streets, neon signs pulsing in the evening air, the faint echo of bass lines spilling from rooftop bars. Harper Lane, fresh from another punishing training session, ducked into a quiet corner cafe that smelled of roasted espresso and old wood. She wasn't here for coffee. At the far end, in a booth tucked beneath a row of dusty boxing posters, sat a man in a worn bomber jacket, shoulders slouched, a ball cap pulled low. His face was road-mapped with years and fights. Cut man, corner man, survivor of the grind. "Lane," he said without preamble, motioning her to sit. "Been a long time." "Miles," she greeted, sliding into the booth. She hadn't seen him since her early days at regional tournaments, back when Hunter Blake was more than just a name from her past, when he was her fighter, her partner in and out of the cage. They made small talk at first, trading the currency of fighters, old bouts, old grudges, who'd hung up the gloves, and who should have but didn't. Then, almost too casually, Harper steered the conversation to that night 12 years ago. The training accident. The one that had ended Hunter's career and, in her mind, had Colton Hayes' fingerprints all over it. "You were there," she said, her voice even, but edged. "Tell me what really happened." Miles leaned back, studying her like a ref deciding whether to stop a fight. "You're still carrying that." "I want the truth." He sighed, rubbed the stubble on his chin. Hunter was the golden boy, no doubt, but he had a reckless streak. That day in the cage, the coach called for light contact, just flow drills. Hunter decided to go full speed on a takedown without setting it up. Head down, chin exposed, all gas. Colton was just defending. If he hadn't countered the way he did, Hunter's neck could have snapped on the mat. As it was, he took the fall bad, tore the ligaments in his shoulder. Career-ending, yeah. But Colton saved him from worse. The words hung between them like a bell that had been struck once and was still ringing. Harper's stomach dropped. She'd built an entire narrative in her mind. Colton as the careless brute who'd destroyed someone she loved. It had fueled her resentment, her suspicion, her need to see him unmasked. And now, with a few blunt sentences, Miles had dismantled it. "Why didn't anyone say this before?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miles's eyes softened. Pride. Hunter didn't want the story to be that he caused his own injury. He let people believe what they wanted to believe, and Colton? He's not the type to argue with the noise. Some men would rather be misunderstood than waste breath defending themselves. Hopper stared at her hands, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying the storm inside. When they parted, she stepped into the cool night, the city lights blurring in her vision. The air felt heavier, not with exhaustion, but with something else. Guilt, maybe, or the slow unraveling of a grudge she'd nurtured for over a decade. Back in her apartment, Hopper stood in front of her full-length mirror. She'd left the overhead lights off, letting the room be lit only by the warm spill from a single lamp. Her reflection looked back, hair damp from the shower, sweatshirt loose over training shorts, jaw tight. She tilted her head, almost daring the image to flinch. "You're fighting for Hunter," she murmured to the woman in the glass. The reflection stayed silent. "Or," she said more quietly, "you're fighting for yourself." The silence felt like an answer. Memories flashed. Hunter laughing off bruises, telling her every fight was about proving you belonged. Her own first championship win, the roar of the crowd pouring into her like fire, the moment Colton had dropped her with a sweep, and the strange, infuriating respect in his eyes when he'd stepped back instead of pressing the advantage. Was this upcoming bout really about redemption? Or was it about ego? About her needing the last word in a story that Colton might not even think about anymore? She paced the length of her living room, the city skyline framed in her windows. The $10 million purse, the charity, the media circus. It was all noise, set dressing for something more personal. She realized, with a kind of quiet dread, that she didn't want to admit the truth. If Colton beat her, it wouldn't be because she was unprepared. It would be because he had always been the better fighter, and she had mistaken silence for weakness. She stopped in front of the mirror again. This time, she didn't speak. She just looked, at the set of her shoulders, the steadiness of her breathing, the woman she'd become, and beneath all the titles, all the corporate armor, she saw the fighter who still needed to know she could win without anyone else's shadow over her. The clock ticked. Somewhere out there, Colton was training in that quiet, disciplined way of his, probably not thinking about the storm in her chest. Hopper touched the mirror, fingers against fingers, as if to remind herself that no matter what the world saw on fight night, the real battle would be decided here, in the space between what she knew and what she could admit. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if the person she was really fighting was herself. The cemetery lay on the edge of town, where the street lights gave way to open fields, and the air turned cooler, quieter. The November night was still, the moon slipping through ragged clouds to cast a soft silver light over the granite headstones. Colton Hayes pushed open the iron gate, the faint creak echoing into the dark. Evan walked beside him, a small hand tucked into his father's. The boy's jacket was zipped to his chin, and his breath puffed into the cold air in short bursts. They followed a narrow gravel path to a familiar spot beneath a willow tree. The branches hung low, whispering in the breeze. There, a simple headstone stood, the inscription weathered but clear. Claire Hayes, beloved wife and mother. Colton crouched, brushing away a stray leaf from the base of the stone. He placed a small bouquet of wildflowers, Evan's choice, against the marble. Then he sat back on his heels, letting the silence stretch. Evan glanced up. "Do you talk to her when you come here?" Colton smiled faintly. "Every time." He shifted so that his knees bent, hands resting loosely on them. His gaze stayed fixed on the headstone, but his voice softened, as if meant for only one listener. "Claire," he said quietly, "it's been a while since I've had to step back into that world. You'd probably tell me I'm crazy. But tomorrow, I'm stepping into a fight. Not for glory, not for headlines. For him." Evan's small fingers tightened around his father's sleeve. Colton turned to his son. "Listen to me, kiddo. Tomorrow's about more than winning or losing. It's about showing you that no matter what life hands you, setbacks, losses, the hard knocks, you stand up. You try. You fight for what matters. And for me, that's you." Evan blinked hard, the moonlight catching in his eyes. "But I already am proud of you." The words hit Colton like a punch he hadn't braced for. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that started in his eyes. "Then I'm already ahead." They stayed for a while longer, speaking in low tones, about school, about memories of Claire, about nothing and everything. Eventually, Colton rose, brushing the damp from his knees. He gave the headstone one last nod, then took Evan's hand and led him back toward the gate. Across town, Harper Lane sat alone in her high-rise apartment. The city lights stretched out beneath her like a scatter of jewels. Her gear bag was packed by the door, gloves resting on top, their leather gleaming in the lamplight. She had been pacing for nearly an hour, unable to shake the tight coil of energy in her chest. When the knock came, it startled her. She crossed to the door, half expecting her coach or a delivery. Instead, there was no one. Only a plain white envelope on the floor. No return address. No markings. She hesitated, then picked it up. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, the handwriting neat and deliberate. "Forgiveness holds more power than victory." No signature, no explanation. Harper stood in the doorway, the paper trembling slightly in her hand. She turned it over, searching for some clue. But it was bare. The words looped in her mind, over and over, until she had to sit down. Forgiveness. It was such a simple idea, and yet it pressed against everything she had been building toward. For weeks, she had sharpened herself into a blade aimed at Colton Hayes. Every training session, every interview, every ounce of her will had been about one thing: winning. But the letter cracked something in her. She thought of what Miles had told her, of the truth she'd only just learned, that Colton had saved Hunter from worse harm. She thought of the quiet dignity in Colton's eyes, the way he'd never once tried to smear Hunter to defend himself. And she thought of the strange, infuriating respect she'd felt when he'd swept her to the mat and then stepped back instead of pressing his advantage. Harper folded the letter carefully, tucking it into the inside pocket of her jacket. She didn't know who had sent it, or why it had come now, but it sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't ignore. For a long moment, she stood at the window, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Colton was preparing in his own way, maybe tucking his son into bed, maybe going over his strategy in the quiet of his own thoughts. She wondered if he was thinking of her, not as an opponent, but as a person. And for the first time since issuing the challenge, Harper felt something shift. Not weakness, not doubt, but a question she couldn't yet answer. When the bell rang tomorrow, would she be fighting to win, or to understand? In the cold quiet of the cemetery, Colton led Evan to the truck, starting the engine and letting the heater hum to life. In the high-rise glow of her apartment, Harper stood in the dim light, the letter's words still burning in her mind. 2 very different nights, 2 very different hearts, but both knowing that tomorrow nothing would be the same. The lights of the Las Vegas Grand Arena burned like molten gold against the dark. Every seat was filled, the hum of the crowd rising and falling in waves, building into a storm of anticipation. Outside the ring, the air was thick with the scent of adrenaline, tangy and electric. Cameramen jockeyed for position, capturing every inch of the gleaming mat under the harsh, unforgiving spotlights. When Harper Lane stepped through the tunnel, the place erupted. Her name rolled through the stands like thunder, banners waving high, fans chanting in unison. She wore her championship robe, black silk trimmed in gold, her gloves already fastened. Every movement was calculated, shoulders back, chin high, eyes locked on the ring. She exuded the aura of a champion, every step claiming the space as hers. On the opposite side, Colton Hayes entered without the fanfare. No pyrotechnics, no booming entrance music, just a steady walk down the aisle in simple fight shorts and a faded grey hoodie he stripped off at the ropes. The veterans in the crowd noticed the way he moved, economical, balanced, like a man who'd learned long ago to waste nothing, not even a step. His expression was unreadable. From ringside, Evan watched from his seat between a group of veterans. The boy's hands were clenched tight around a small American flag, his knuckles white. The bell rang. Harper opened fast, circling like a predator, her footwork crisp and deliberate. She jabbed, testing him, her strikes quick and probing. Colton blocked, shifted, slipped out of range without countering. Each time she tried to cut him off, he slid away, angle shifting with the ease of a man who knew every inch of the mat. The crowd roared with each flurry, Harper driving forward, Colton absorbing the momentum, redirecting it like water flowing around rock. His defense was infuriating in its patience. Harper's breath grew faster, her brow damp beneath the arena lights. She was used to opponents who broke under the pressure. Colton refused to break. By the 3rd round, the energy had shifted. The crowd had come to see Harper dominate, but now they leaned forward, murmuring, sensing the unshakable calm in the man in the other corner. Every dodge, every subtle shift of his stance seemed almost surgical, controlled, deliberate, almost art. Howard Drake sat ringside, jaw tight, eyes narrowing. This wasn't the spectacle he'd counted on. The 4th and final round began with Harper feinting high, then driving in low for a takedown. Colton sprawled, countered, and in a blink, they were tangled on the mat. The arena gasped as he transitioned, smooth, flawless, into a chokehold that locked her in place. It was the moment every fighter dreams of, victory within reach. Harper's breath was hot against his forearm, her muscles straining, the crowd chanting, "Finish it, finish it." And then he loosened his grip. The shift was so subtle at first that even Harper didn't register it. When she did, her body instinctively pushed to stand, but her legs betrayed her. Off balance from the release, she stumbled, her foot catching the mat, and went down hard on one knee. The crowd roared, confused, cheers, gasps, shouts of outrage mingling in a single, deafening wave. Harper's eyes snapped up to his. In them, she saw no mockery, no condescension, only something steady, undraken. Respect. Colton stepped back, giving her space. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "Not like this. The referee moved between them, checking Harper before signaling the fight to resume. But for a heartbeat, neither moved. Around them, the noise surged to a fever pitch, cameras flashing like lightning. From the stands, Evan's voice pierced the din. "Go, Dad." Colton's jaw tightened. Across from him, Harper's breathing evened, her eyes never leaving his. Somewhere beneath the heat and the pride, something else had begun to take root. The bell hadn't rung yet, but both of them knew. Whatever happened next wouldn't just be about the 10 million. The sound in the arena was deafening. Cheers, shouts, and the crackling buzz of disbelief hanging in the air. Harper lay on her back, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the lights blazing above her. For a long second, she just listened, to the pounding of her heart, to the muffled roar beyond the blood rushing in her ears. Then, a shadow fell across her. Colton Hayes. He didn't stand there in triumph. He didn't posture for the cameras or raise his fists. Instead, he extended a hand, open, steady, unwavering. His gaze held hers, not demanding, not pitying, but offering. Slowly, Harper's gloved fingers reached up. Colton's grip was strong, yet gentle as he pulled her to her feet. The crowd roared again, the noise swelling until it seemed the roof might come off. Harper stumbled slightly, but Colton's other hand came up, steadying her by the elbow. In the ring's center, under the blinding lights, his voice was low but carried, amplified by the arena mics. "Victory," he said, "isn't about knocking someone down. It's about knowing when to lift them up." The line hit the air like a spark to dry tinder. A wave of applause and cheers swept through the stands, swelling until every person, fans, fighters, veterans, even the officials, was on their feet. Evan, in the front row, stood so fast his chair clattered to the floor. His small hands clapped until they hurt, eyes shining with pride that no prize money could match. Harper swallowed hard, her breath catching. Not from exhaustion, but from something heavier that had been sitting on her chest for 12 long years. She turned to the referee, then to the cameras circling like hawks. Her chest rose and fell once more before she stepped toward the microphone at the announcer's table. The crowd's noise dipped, curiosity cutting through the frenzy. "I have something to say," she began, her voice still ragged from the fight, but resolute. 12 years ago, I believed a story, a lie, that Colton Hayes was responsible for ending the career of someone I cared about. I carried that belief into today. I carried it into this fight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Howard Drake's face tightened in the VIP box, sensing the shift. Harper continued, locking eyes with the nearest camera, so every viewer at home would feel her words as if they were in the room. "The truth is, Colton didn't cause that injury. He prevented it from being far worse. That day, he saved Hunter Blake's life on the mat, and I repaid him with judgment and resentment." A collective gasp moved through the audience. The weight of 12 years of silence broke in that moment. She turned to Colton, her tone softening. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. You deserve your name back, and my respect." The applause started small, from a corner of the arena, then grew until it thundered again. Colton gave a small nod, not basking in it, not inflating himself with the vindication, but accepting it with the quiet dignity of a man who never fought for applause in the first place. Somewhere in the press pit, reporters scrambled to push the story live, headlines about truth, honor, and the $10 million fight flashing onto screens before the words had even left her lips. Harper took his wrist and, in a symbolic reversal, raised his hand high. The camera flashes strobed across their faces. For the first time, the crowd wasn't cheering a victor. They were cheering two warriors who had met in the ring and walked out better than they'd entered. As the roar of the crowd surged, they held each other's gaze for a beat longer, a silent pact passing between them, one built on respect, hard-earned in the ring. From the veteran section, a voice rang out, deep and proud. "That's what a fighter looks like." Colton glanced down at Evan, who was grinning so wide it was almost comical. The boy mouthed, "You did it." But Colton knew it wasn't about him winning or losing. It was about showing his son what real strength meant. In that moment, Hopper stepped closer, speaking quietly so only he could hear. "That $10 million, let's split it. Half to the veterans' families, half to rebuild your father's old dojo." Colton's jaw tensed, emotion threatening to break his composure. He nodded once, a silent agreement. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, but the words barely mattered. The image, the former MMA champion and the quiet, steadfast veteran standing together, would be the one burned into the memory of every person who witnessed it. In Las Vegas that night, the $10 million fight ended without a knockout, but the world walked away, knowing a truth far more valuable. Some victories are written not on scorecards, but in the hearts of those willing to stand, lift, and forgive. The headlines were relentless the next morning. Truth triumphs in the $10 million fight. CEO admits fault. Veteran redeemed. And, perhaps the sweetest headline for Colton, Hopper Lane and Colton Hayes to launch new MMA program for veterans. Howard Drake didn't survive the storm. By midday, the board convened an emergency meeting. His quiet campaign of manipulation, fanning the flames of public ridicule, distorting facts to push Hopper toward a public fall, was laid bare. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Howard left the building flanked by security, his eyes dark with the weight of a downfall he'd crafted with his own hands. In a tense boardroom showdown, Hopper laid out every manipulation, emails, witness accounts, and the trail of his schemes until the silence from the directors became a verdict. Howard's confident smirk faded with each revelation, and when the unanimous vote came, his exit was swift and without ceremony. That same afternoon, Hopper stood at the edge of the old industrial block, where the dust-covered sign of Hale's dojo still hung crooked over a locked steel door. She brushed her fingers over the faded lettering, imagining the sound of fists hitting pads, the laughter of kids on the mats, the kind of hope this place once held. Colton arrived a few minutes later, Evan trailing behind him with a grin too big to contain. "This place," Colton began, his voice carrying both nostalgia and hesitation, "was my father's life. Thought it'd stay closed forever." "It shouldn't," Hopper said simply. "We can make it more than it ever was. A training center for veterans who need direction, and for kids who need something to believe in." Colton studied her, searching for any trace of pity or PR polish. He found none, only resolve. A small smile tugged at his lips. "You really think this will work?" "I don't think," she replied. "I know, but only if we do it together." Evan's eyes bounced between them. "Does that mean we're really opening it again?" "Yes," Hopper said, crouching to his level. "And you, young man, are going to be our first official student." From behind her back, she pulled out a small box. Inside lay a pair of well-worn red boxing gloves, the leather scuffed and softened by years of use. Evan's mouth fell open. "These were mine," Hopper said, holding them out. "They've been with me through every win, every loss. I want you to have them, to remind you that real strength isn't in how hard you can hit, but in knowing when to use it to protect someone." Evan touched the gloves as if they were made of glass. "I'll take care of them," he whispered, his voice carrying a weight far older than his 9 years. Colton watched the exchange, his chest tightening. He'd fought for his son's future in ways Evan might never fully understand. But this moment, was proof that the fight had already been worth it. Work began immediately. The three of them stood in the middle of the dojo as sunlight streamed through cracked windows. Dust swirled in golden beams, while Colton tightened old punching bags. Harper sketched floor plans for new mats, and Evan swept the corners with more enthusiasm than skill. Veterans from Colton's past began to show up, one by one. Some brought tools, others brought paint, and a few simply brought stories. The space came alive again, not just with the sound of gloves snapping against pads, but with laughter, purpose, and the steady heartbeat of community. By the time the sign out front was replaced, Hale's Dojo, home for veterans and youth, it was more than a gym. It was a promise kept. As they locked up one evening, Harper glanced at Colton, the corners of her lips curving into a rare, unguarded smile. "You know, for someone who didn't want to step into the ring, you've got a habit of changing the game." Colton chuckled, shaking his head. "Guess some fights are worth taking." They stepped out into the cooling twilight, Evan walking between them, one glove in each hand. The neon sign flickered to life behind them, casting a warm glow across the cracked sidewalk. For the first time in years, Colton didn't feel like he was carrying his past alone. And for Harper, the ring wasn't the only place she could prove herself. Some victories, they both realized, are measured not by trophies, but by the lives changed in their wake. The gym buzzed with the hum of life again. Fresh mats lay rolled out across the floor, their scent still sharp, mingling with the faint aroma of polished wood and clean leather. Sunlight spilled through the wide front windows, striking the center of the room where Colton Hayes stood, feet planted, posture steady, eyes scanning the semicircle of men, women, and children gathered around him. "Balance," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an unshakable weight, "isn't just about where your feet are. It's about where your mind is. Lose your temper, you lose your ground. Keep your center. Keep your control." He demonstrated slowly, his movements deliberate and precise, almost meditative. Each step, each pivot, each controlled exhale was an unspoken lesson in discipline. At the edge of the mat, Harper Lane stood, not as the high-heeled CEO who once commanded boardrooms, but as a student, her hair tied back, gloves hanging loosely from her wrists. Her eyes followed every move, her brow furrowed in concentration. The pride that once bristled in her stance had softened into something quieter, more open. Colton caught her gaze briefly. No challenge, no rivalry, just a simple acknowledgement. Two people standing on the same side now. "All right," Colton continued. "We're going to pair up. You'll practice one strike, one block, slow and deliberate. This is not about winning. This is about understanding." Pairs formed quickly. Veterans partnered with kids. A few teenagers, clearly more interested in testing their strength, were gently corrected when they moved too fast. Harper found herself with a partner, a young woman, barely 20, who moved with surprising agility. They exchanged light jabs and blocks, Harper's focus deepening with every pass. Evan, wearing his oversized headgear and the red gloves Harper had given him, stepped onto the mat with a boy his age. Colton crouched beside them, adjusting Evan's stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees soft. "Keep your hands up." Evan nodded, his eyes bright with determination. The two boys began slowly, one throwing a controlled jab, the other blocking and stepping back. Colton watched closely, offering small corrections, but letting them find their rhythm. Minutes passed, the sound of padded gloves meeting padded targets echoing softly through the dojo. And then, it happened. Evan's opponent feinted left. Evan didn't flinch. Instead, he pivoted perfectly, absorbing the motion and redirecting it, just as Colton had taught. The boy stumbled slightly, more from surprise than impact, and Evan held his stance, poised, calm, not rushing to finish the move. It was flawless. Harper, watching from across the mat, caught Colton's eye at the exact moment he looked at her. A slow smile spread across his face. She returned it. Small at first, then warmer, fuller. It wasn't the grin of victory, nor the smugness of having proved a point. It was something quieter, a shared pride. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Around them, the class continued, but that single exchange hung in the air, unshaken by the noise. In that moment, Harper saw Colton not as the man she had once challenged, nor as the figure from a past she had misunderstood, but as a father. One whose strength came not from the force of his fists, but from the patience in his teaching. And Colton saw Harper not as the CEO who had tried to test him, but as someone willing to step down from the platform of pride to learn alongside those she aimed to help. "All right, that's enough for today," Colton called out eventually, clapping his hands. "Remember, strength without control is just chaos. We don't train chaos here." As the students began unwrapping their hands and putting away gear, Evan bounded over to his father, practically glowing. "Did you see that move? I didn't even think. I just did it." Colton ruffled his hair. "That's because you kept your head clear. That's the whole point." Harper approached, gloves still in hand. She glanced down at Evan. "I think those red gloves might just be lucky." Evan grinned. "They're more than lucky. They're a promise." Colton looked between them, feeling something shift in the air, something not unlike the controlled balance he'd been teaching. Not the rush of a fight, not the tension of old wounds, but the steady grounding of trust forming where mistrust once lived. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting the dojo in a warm, golden light. For the first time, it didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home. Late afternoon draped the quiet street in a soft amber glow. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the trees, painting long shadows on the pavement, as Colton, Harper, and Evan stepped out of the dojo together. The air was warm, but carried that gentle coolness that hinted at evening's approach. Evan walked between them, his small hands swinging in rhythm with his steps, still wearing the red boxing gloves Harper had given him. His face was flushed from training, but his eyes were lit with that unmistakable energy that only comes from doing something that makes you feel alive. He glanced up at his father. "Dad, did we win today?" Colton slowed his pace, letting the question breathe in the warm air before answering. He crouched slightly to meet his son's gaze. "The biggest win, kiddo," he said, voice low and steady, "is when you leave the mat and still keep your heart whole. That's a victory no one can take from you." Evan thought about that for a moment, then grinned. "Then I guess we're undefeated." Colton chuckled, ruffling his hair before standing again. They reached the entrance of the dojo, the wooden sign swaying gently in the evening breeze. Colton took a moment to look back through the glass door. Inside, the mats were neatly rolled, the punching bags hanging still. For years, this place had been a memory, his father-in-law's pride, a sanctuary he thought he'd lost forever. Now, it was alive again, not because of a fight won, but because of what they had chosen to build after. He reached for the keys, the metal cool in his hand, and turned the lock. The click echoed softly, final yet comforting, as if sealing in the day's quiet triumphs. Harper lingered at his side, her eyes following his hand as it left the door. She wasn't dressed in her usual tailored armor of power suits, but in a simple blouse and jeans. The sunlight caught the edges of her hair, casting a faint halo around her profile. "Colton," she said, her voice gentle, so unlike the first time she had spoken his name. He glanced at her, focused at her. "Thank you," she continued, "for not finishing the fight that day." For a moment, he didn't answer. The memory of the arena flickered in his mind, the roar of the crowd, the weight of the moment, the choice that had felt heavier than any opponent he'd ever faced. Finally, he met her gaze. "Some fights don't need to end for you to know who's won." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. It wasn't about victory anymore. It was about respect. From the sidewalk, Evan let out a burst of laughter at something unseen, pure, unrestrained, the kind of laughter that could melt the hardest day. Both Colton and Harper turned toward him instinctively, their smiles softening, drawn into the warmth of that sound, the camera of the mind holds there. Evan framed in the golden light, his laughter spilling into the fading day. Harper and Colton standing side by side, a quiet understanding between them. The locked dojo behind them, no longer a place of loss, but a foundation for whatever came next. The sunlight thinned into a burnished gold as they began walking again, the three silhouettes stretching across the sidewalk, unhurried. Some victories come with belts and trophies. Others are written in the ease of your stride when you walk away, knowing you've kept your dignity, your compassion, and your heart intact. As the screen fades, Evan's laughter lingers, carried into the twilight, a sound that promises more than triumph. It promises peace